process, how she's using the motif of food to basically explain her theme about imperialism.
Yes.
American imperialism.
So we're looking for a message about American imperialism through the motif of food. Any opening ideas as to what the message is? Whether or not it is approval, disapproval, talk to me. Kendall, what you think?
I think the message is Santiago like gives us examples of Neji relationship with food.
So through the motif of food, that's what you get in these notes down in your notebook. I'm gonna zoom in. I know I write a little small, but stay with me. You can also listen to what I'm saying. Make sure you jotting it down. Aaliyah, you with me? Through the motif of food, it's not a complete sentence. Santiago conveys, expresses. What are our thoughts? Marcus?
Conveys.
Conveys what?
Conveys
You got it.
the basically the negative impact of imperialism.
Conveys. Beautiful. Beautifully put. Make sure y'all are jotting this down because Marcus hit the nail on the head just now. We're going to elaborate on that idea he just brought up with quotes and analysis. So conveys the negative impact of American imperialism in where? Conveys the negative impact of American imperialism in Puerto Rico. Jot that down for yourself. Now that we have made what step is A into this? A stands for?
Argument.
Argument, beautiful. Now that we have made an argument, we didn't just say they're talking about American imperialism, we said the impact, right? How do we support this? What's our next step? What's the only way to support your argument? Do you zoom in on it?
Evidence.
Yes. What? Anybody have strong quotes? Me. What strong quote can we use between pages 66, 74, and 76 to support or be an example of the motif of food? Got it?
On page 66, it says there, like in a...
1 second. Janae said we're on page 66, so what should we be doing?
On page 66.
Y'all should be on page 66. Thank you, Pamela. So I'm looking for those books to be open. Sebastian, stay with me. Victor, you on page 66? Marquise, you there? Michaela, you there? Zach, you there? We're on page 66 right now. Are we at the top of the page, middle, or the bottom? We're in the middle. Go right open your book.
It says there was no rice on the chart, no beans, no salt, salted codfish. There were big white eggs, not all like the small round ones. Our hens gave us.
Beautiful. So y'all see this? Yes. Somebody, when you come back, just get bigger. There was no, that's fine. There was no rice on the chart, no beans, no salted codfish, etc., etc. Can y'all get that written down into your notes as well? Being that it's on page 66, you don't need to 100% rely on these notes, right? Because you got it right in front of you. Let's jot that down.
Thank you.
There was no rice on the chart. No beans. No salted codfish. All pens should be moving. Thank you so much for the 100%. Come up here. There were big white eggs, not like the small round ones our hens gave us. Dot, dot, dot. There's a lot more in that section that we can jot down, but for the sake of notes, we don't need to write the entire page, right? What I want us to do now, I recognize that the quote is asking us, Sebastian, for motif of food, but what other devices do we recognize in that quote that Johnny just gave us? We know that sometimes things can exist at the same time. Jaden, what else we see here?
I'm not sure, but is it possibly repetition?
Yeah, what do we see repeated?
When she compared the food to
So you telling me two different devices. You told me first repetition. What is repeated here? What specific word?
can't really see that.
There was no rice on the chart, no beans, no salted codfish.
Oh, word no.
Yeah. So I'm adding no is repeated. Or there was no. She keeps saying there was no this, there was no that. Right? And then you also started to give us another device that's here. There is this comparison. What is being compared? Let's have one voice at a time, but y'all on the right track, Beth.
I was gonna say what they was comparing is the fact that the things that Neki knew and like what she didn't know, like what Neki knew and what Americans didn't know. Or something.
Specifically, this is an example of what motif.
Um,
What is she describing here?
food.
Food, exactly. So she's showing us what food versus what food.
American versus Puerto Rican.
American versus Puerto Rican food. Beautiful. So comparison between American food and Puerto Rican food. The reason why I left this space here is because we're on the right track saying there's a comparison. What is that literary device called when you're comparing things in the text? Marcus is on fire today. What is it called when things are being compared in the text? What literary device, Ibu? Juxtaposition. Y'all got it. So we completed another step. What step did we just complete? Yeah. We're looking at the key language, that Mr. Cuff language in the text to get ready to unpack the larger meaning. So we recognize that no is being repeated. We recognize that there's a comparison between the American food and the Puerto Rican food. What is that comparison? What is she saying by putting these two things side by side? Rowan, you have an idea?
By Santiago juxtaposing American and Puerto Rican food, she's expressing the very small differences.
Can you speak just a little louder? Because I feel like you're saying something really brilliant. I just can't hear it all the way. So in order to, louder?
In order to show Santiago's expression, she shows how Puerto Rican food and American food are extremely different and how Maggie doesn't connect with it.
In order to show the extreme differences between them. Now, based on her describing these differences, the language that she's using, her saying that there were big white eggs, not like the small round ones our hens gave us, how do we assume that she feels about these differences? Does she approve of the American food despite it being different? We're shaking our heads no. How come, Marquise? Why doesn't Neki approve of this? What is she kind of hinting is better than the American food? And how do you know, Deanna?
She's saying that the Puerto Rican food is better than American food because like there's lots of things that the American food has that Puerto Rican has.
Doesn't have.
Yeah, that doesn't have.
So I'm adding here, Neki expresses favoritism of the food from PR because for her to specifically describe to us that the food from Puerto Rico or the eggs from PR come directly from the hen, what is she suggesting about the American food? Go one voice at a time. Y'all have great ideas. Go, Berto. What did you just say? You said something.
The Puerto Rican food is fresh and American food is
Beautiful. Because it's more fresh or it's fresher. While the American food,
I won't say fresh. Just like,
It was.
let's say organic.
Yeah, they said that in the book.
Beautiful. It's organic. Let's use that word instead. It's a much better word. Than the American processed food. And we also just saw that in our documentary yesterday, right? So what is this meant to say? We understand that Neki disapproves. She does not, sorry. she's not really moved by this new American food that they're pushing on them. So what is the message here? Keep in mind that in this story, we're also talking about what? Remind yourself of the title, When I Was Puerto Rican. What is the focus of this story? Aaliyah, what you think? Identity, exactly. So how might her, I guess, review of this American food be giving us a message about her identity or what we should take away from this? Royan, what are your thoughts?
By Neji rejecting the American food, it's showing that she wants to hold on to her Puerto Rican identity and not let it go.
Beautifully put, Royan. Can you say it louder so I can jot this down for your peers?
By Neji rejecting the American food, it shows how she still wants to hold on to her Puerto Rican identity.
Demonstrates her effort to hold on to her Puerto Rican identity. And what does she, bless you, what is she trying to avoid? What are the Americans trying to do to the Puerto Ricans? Obviously, we've covered imperialism. Anybody know the word for trying to make them, Marcus, what do you think? Yes, exactly. They're trying to Americanize them and avoid Americanization. He's gonna say what? Conquer, conform, assimilate. All those words work here, but Marcus got it. So this is like our zoom out. I'll read this one more time in case you can't see from the back. Negi's rejection of the American food demonstrates her effort to hold on to her Puerto Rican identity and avoid Americanization. What does she also say in the book to support this? Bless you. When she's kind of having that conversation with Bobby, anybody catch that?
Oh, she don't want to be American.
Exactly. She doesn't want to be American, right? So all of these things point to the same message that we just came up with. Any questions about this before we move on to money?
I missed the last one.
Okay, I'll help you out in just a second. I'm gonna make sure that both of us have this written down. I'll bring it to you in just a moment. Ibu?
Can you use evidence from other pages?
You absolutely should use evidence from other pages, because remember, when we take notes together, this is not the end all be all. There's so many options for quotes that are examples of the motif of food, especially because motif means it's repeated idea or image, right? So we should see that a couple of times. So absolutely, if you flip to the last page, now it's time for your exit ticket. Like Ibu said, choose another quote that's an example of the food motif. Break down how that quote reveals the message that we just came up with, our final stamp. Love to see that some of us have already gotten started. You have the last few minutes of class to wrap that up. Beautiful job today.